super excited to be here today. I'm just going to set it up here, hopefully, so I can set up my screen. All good there?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Golden Ticket Sports and Basketball Immersion for asking me to be here today. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to share with all of you, and also the opportunity to learn from so many other great coaches across the country. It's exciting to me that during these challenging times that we've found a way to make this a great opportunity for us to all share about the sport that we really love. And it's just such a unique opportunity with this platform and learning about Zoom. I didn't know anything about Zoom 2 months ago, and I don't know that I'd say I'm a pro, but I feel like I know enough now to get going. So I chose this topic, Steps to Planning Your Best Practice, because I believe it's one of my strengths, and I'm just happy to be able to share some of the things, the steps that I use to plan my best practice, and hopefully that will help you. So I split this up into 3 sections. The first section is really about developing your plan. The second section is creating your framework. And then lastly, being able to analyze and reflect on that. I think that when we're planning our practices, of course, you really have to think about the who, what, when, where, and why, and how being the most important. And of course, depending on who you're coaching, what age they are, what gender, what their skill level is, the amount of time that you have in your season. There are so many bigger things to take into consideration, but I'm going to really just try to narrow down the focus on planning your best practice. So first of all, looking at your plan, I think that there are 3 areas that really need to really fit into your plan. And that first area is your yearly training plan. I think we could talk about that for hours, and I am definitely not going to do that tonight. But I think just I will talk a little bit about my YTP and how we can look at the phase or focus and in volume and intensity, and how that will then impact my practice planning. And then a bit about building up to competition days. Of course, within your plan, you have to be true to yourself. So you really have to think about what your coaching philosophy is. And what you believe is important, how you believe your athletes will learn best. And then lastly, your daily training environment. And again, what's important to you so that you make sure you don't leave anything out. This is a snapshot of our YTP from this past October. So October for us is still partially our pre-competitive phase, as it's predominantly non-conference games, but we are, of course, getting into competition, and league games start that last week of October for us. A few things that I just wanted to point out and bring to your attention, because I'll talk about them, is that when I'm planning my practices, I've got to look at my YTP so that I can make decisions around what level, what the volume and intensity, as well as what phase we're in and what we're really trying to focus on. So specifically here, you'll see some colors. I just want to highlight the green practices for us are moderate in both volume and intensity, but we're really using RPE. And for those of you that aren't familiar, that's our rating of perceived exertion. So we're using that as the indicator. So on a moderate practice, we're looking to have the athletes rate it at around a 4 or 5. And then for a moderate to high, we want the RPE to be around 6 to 8, and a high RPE coming in anywhere from 8 to 10. You'll see here, we are really trying to build up towards our competition days. So kind of gone are the times when we used to think that the day before a game that we should actually decrease, all intensity and almost make it like a walkthrough. We're really trying to build up to competition days and likely decrease our volume, but really increase that intensity to ensure that our muscles are ready for game day. I would also just highlight the fact that we had some pretty heavy game weeks during this month of October. So we had 2 weeks where we had 3 games in a row. And of course, we were trying to do that to try to prepare, almost over-prepare for the hopeful of making it to nationals and having 3 games in 4 days. So knowing that we're capable of doing that in our preseason. But you'll notice on both of those weeks that we would take a day off during the week. So at no week during the season are we ever training / competing for more than 6 days in a row. So that means that if we are going to have 3 games on the weekend, then we're going to have to modify our schedule during the week so that we make sure that our athletes aren't overtraining. Next, just trying to think about your coaching philosophy, right? And how that's really going to shape the plan that you're making for your practices. I think that for me, this quote from Benjamin Franklin really kind of sums it up nicely. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. I remember as a young coach feeling that my job as a coach was to tell my athletes all the knowledge that I had, and the more that I could tell them, that was going to lead to them learning and being more successful and help us as a team. And quickly, I would say I learned that learning really isn't going to occur from telling, right? Learning is going to occur from guiding them and involving them in the process. So by using questioning with them, asking them why they made certain decisions, asking them what they saw on a certain play, and that in itself is really going to have a more lasting impact on them. At the end of the day, especially with the FIBA game that we play, we really want to put them in positions to empower them to be able to make decisions. And if that's not showing up in your daily training environment and in your practices, then it's going to be pretty hard to expect that to come game day. So last part of the plan is our daily training environment. And these are some things that I think are super important for me in our daily and training environment. And the first thing is just fun. I mean, I love basketball. That's why I quit teaching to become a full-time coach. But I think it's super important to remember that that's also why the athletes are there. They're here because they love basketball and they love it because they're passionate about it and they see the sport as being fun. So the picture in the background here is from one of our themed practices. It was likely a Halloween practice, just coming in their costumes. But I think there are lots of little things that we intentionally do to create fun in our daily training environment. Next thing is connections. The more that we're able to create opportunities for our athletes to connect, whether that's communicating with each other or having positive teammate interactions, we're really just trying to find ways to ensure that our athletes are working on developing the habits of connecting consistently. Again, so that come game day, that's a habit that we've built into our daily training environment. Competes. No matter what team I've coached, even the ones with Dave, I would say we always try to have competes in our practice plans because we want to be that competitive, defensive team that's gonna, play tough anytime we're on the court. But if you want that as an expectation in games, of course, you got to find opportunities in practice to have those competes. So whether that's individual one-on-ones or anything kind of game related. For us, we always want to be ensuring that we are competing in our practices. And that leads into team identity. Pretty consistently, my team's identity has something to do with being a tough defensive team that wants to be disruptive defensively and create some easy scoring opportunities from our defense. So you should be able to see that if you come to my practice, right? That's got to be in my daily training environment. Whatever your team's identity is in that year, you want to ensure that it should be clear on a regular basis that that's who you are. Yes, you of course also have to work on areas of weakness, but super important that everybody in the gym is clear on what is our team identity and doing things that reflect that. Culture, our team culture, I would say in general, it's pretty consistent, but from year to year, of course, we choose pillars that we really want to focus on. This past year, as an example, we focused on family, growth, and being relentless. And so again, in our daily training environment, we want to make sure that we are doing things that are staying true to living our culture, so that you should be able to see examples of that, and that we should be able to remind the athletes and the athletes remind the staff of that. And lastly is the growth mindset. So although that was one of our pillars this year, in general, I believe having a growth mindset in our daily training environment is important. We consistently talk about trying to get that 1% better. But I believe as a coach, it's then my job to ensure that the things that we're doing in our practices are allowing the athletes to see that growth. So both on an individual level, as well as on a team level. So that means whether it's consistency of coming back to a drill you had done at the beginning of the season, and doing it again a month later, so that the athletes are able to see that growth or lack thereof, which is also a good indicator for you, is going to be really important. So the second part, so now that you have your plan, I think it's so important that you create your framework. And when I say your framework, none of us are really reinventing the wheel in this, right? We're all making use of things like this, but at the end of the day, you really have to create the framework that works best for you. And within that framework, I believe you have to create a template for your practices. You have to think about what type of training is most important and or how that varies over the course of your YTP. And then lastly, identifying roles for athletes as well as your staff so that it's able to stay within your framework. So my template for practices consists of everything on this list. And so it's important to me that at the beginning of every practice that we always have some kind of mental component to start. In the past, I used to always start with a quote of the day, and the intent was really to try to, narrow our focus and really allow the athletes to be able to reflect on perhaps where we were on the season, but really trying to have a bit more of a, life lesson through sport with that. I've shifted in the last year to go to a question of the day. I find that it's just a bit more multi-purpose than just the quote, where not only are we able to narrow the focus and have a great discussion, but it really increases our connections amongst the group and also allows us an opportunity to learn something about each other. Connections, I spoke about that a bit earlier. Again, creating those connections, whether it's communicating with each other, creating opportunities for positive teammate interactions. So just physically connecting with somebody, a pat on the back or the shoulder, which helps them to be able to become external, as well as opportunities for them to debrief with each other throughout the course of practices. I'm fortunate that with our warm-up and activation, we have a strength and conditioning coach who works in conjunction with myself to plan that. For our warm-up and activation, we're always including getting our heart rate up, some kind of dynamic stretching, but then more importantly, really focusing on activating our core and our glutes to be sure that their bodies are prepared for the movements that they're going to endure. And one thing that we've really just started doing in the last year is adding in time to work on linear and lateral movements. So much about basketball is reliant on our ability to decelerate as well as to change directions. And we're just trying to be a bit more intentional in the way that we work on it. So again, our strength and conditioning self works on that and develops that in conjunction with myself, and we have athletes that lead it, but for 5 minutes every day, we work on either our linear and or our lateral movement. And we've seen a lot of gains over the course of this past year, and I'm looking forward to see what we'll be able to see next year as well. Fundamental skills are included in almost every single one of our practices, for sure, based on our YTP and the phase and time of year that we're at. The amount of time that we spend on those skills will change. And at the university level, we do have the advantage, I would say, of also being able to work on fundamental skills in individual workouts. But I do think, again, when you're looking at, why is your team committing turnovers and or making mistakes, that more often than not, it actually comes back to a fundamental skill. So really ensuring that you're finding time to continue to develop those fundamental skills. Next is our breakdowns and competes. Again, always making opportunities to ensure that we're breaking down what we're doing it in game-like ways. Our breakdowns are coming right from the game situations that the girls are facing and or our offenses or defenses, really just any of the concepts that we are trying to enforce, that we want to then intentionally replicate those in breakdowns to increase touches and allow the opportunities to build better decision-making. Tactical is an area that we've really increased in terms of really being able to make decisions, discuss advantages, and really be able to be in positions that they're able to make decisions in end-of-game or end-of-shot clock situations. Shooting is an area I think I've also really increased in the last couple of years. I think early on in my university head coaching career, I thought that we could do more of our shooting outside of practice time and individual workouts, and not that we still don't do that, but I've also really realized that the value of being able to, in shorter blocks, fit in shooting over the course of practice has really reaped a lot of rewards for us. We consistently make time for warm down, so allowing opportunity for the athletes' heart rates to decrease, and as well as prioritizing time for static stretching so that we focus on recovery, something that I think that probably more so in my playing days was not something that we focused on as much. And then lastly, just an opportunity to debrief and then do spotlights. So for debriefing, of course, getting feedback from the athletes on practice, whether that's individually for them and or collectively in terms of some of our focuses. And then something that we call spotlights is really just giving an opportunity for the athletes to spotlight another teammate about something that they specifically did well, especially with the growth mindset in mind. So an example would be, I want to spotlight Meg because I thought she set a great screen that got Kat wide open for a shot, in our 3-on-3 drill. Right? Or, I thought that Emma did a great job of holding us accountable for communication in that baseline inbounds drill. Again, just specifics that really help reward and acknowledge some of the smaller things over the course of a practice. Type of training. So when you're trying to think of, what your framework includes, you've got to consider what type of training you believe is going to be most effective and where you want to prioritize your time. Of course, we only have so much time in all of our practices. The first thing for me that comes to mind is random versus block. So I do still believe there is a time and a place for block training, but that is practicing the same skill over and over. I think specifically with some shooting and or in some individual workouts, we might get a bit more block training. But that in general, we definitely prioritize our time on random training so that the athletes aren't getting in that automotive mode where there's kind of autopilot going over and over, that we need to really facilitate their ability to make decisions. So with that, there has to be variability in what you're doing. That leads me into, decision making. So much about what we are trying to focus on is decision making and putting our athletes in positions that allow them to learn how to make decisions in different situations. The first thing with that is definitely, like I said already about random. It's got to be random. It's got to be game-like. So we can't be doing the same thing over and over. And, when I think about game-like, again, back in probably the beginning of my coaching days, half-court offense, everyone would start in the spots that I wanted them in specifically, and the ball would start with the point guard, at the top, at the point. And really, when does that ever happen in a game, right? And so I think then really trying to be more creative and have things, set up so that you're flowing in from center, or so that you're playing off of a steal and transitioning the other way. For us, because we like to be disruptive defensively, we'll start drills where we're set up in our pressure and we're playing out of an intentional turnover from our press, and then looking to attack and play out of that, because again, that's something specific that we want to be sure that we're prepared to deal with. Of course, you can always look to then change your loads of your drills to increase the pressure with which the athletes have to make those decisions. So whether that's decreasing the time that they have to work with, decreasing the space, maybe increasing advantages or disadvantages by having 5 versus 7 or 7 versus 5. And of course, that can be in smaller games examples as well. And then lastly, just so much about that decision-making process is involving them in it. I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for a potential telling, and that may be after, we've already kind of gone through that questioning. But for me, it's, asking an athlete, what did they see on that play? So that then they can give feedback, and now it's much easier to have that conversation. And then the outcome is them having a clear understanding and really learning what they're looking for when they're trying to make that decision, and what they're trying to read, as opposed to the coach just saying, you need to attack the baseline on that every time. Identifying roles for your athletes and staff. Something That communication, of course, is always going to put us in the best position to be successful. Clearly communicating those ahead of time with both athletes and staff. For me, with my leaders, I make sure that ahead of time that I make it very clear that they are to be the leaders by example, and what our expectations are of that we expect them to lead huddles, that we expect them, that when practice isn't going well, that the leaders have the authority to be able to ask me for a timeout so that they can have a quick team timeout to be able to refocus and regroup. Again, I think just opportunities to ensure that they understand their roles, but really that you're allowing them a chance to be empowered. I make it clear, in terms of accountability, we're holding them accountable with respect to their relentless work ethic, and being prepared and being on time. Then with our types of drills, I find that for us, it's being clear on this is a drill where we're trying to play through mistakes. So we're only going to give you a small amount of information at the beginning, and we're not going to take questions because we want them to work on A, feeling uncomfortable, but B, really problem solving on the fly and being able to work through it together on the court, knowing again that those are situations that they're going to face in games. And if we always give them the answers in practice ahead of time, then come game time, when they don't have that answer, it's going to be much more challenging for them. The last thing that we make clear with our athletes, we do something called motivational buddies, where everyone has somebody on the team that they're responsible for. And so if you notice that your motivational buddy is maybe, going pretty internal because they're not having a great practice or they've missed a few shots, it's your responsibility to reach out and really just maybe give them a PTI and connect with them to help them get more external. With assistant coaches, I'm fortunate to have a full-time assistant coach, as well as some volunteer assistant coaches who are very committed. But I meet with them all, of course, ahead of time prior to the season. And I have assistant coaches who, one of my assistant coaches is responsible for focusing on our defense and focusing on our forwards. Another assistant coach who's focusing on our offense and focusing on our guards. And then after that, it becomes a little bit more specific based on practice and which drill we're in and points of emphasis, so that we ensure that not everybody, of course, is watching the ball, that we've got people watching weak side movement offensively and defensively. And then even more specifically with respect to where coaches are standing during a drill. So never should you walk into the gym while any drill or anything is happening in our practice, and should all of our coaches be together. Everyone should be kind of spaced out differently depending on what their roles are, and put them in a position that allows them to give feedback and really coach the athletes, so that we're maximizing our time with that. So next, I just wanted to give you a glimpse. I guess I've got 4 practice plan examples here. And this is the template that I've used for a while now and really like it, but I'm sure they're all a little bit the same. I'll point out a few things here. First of all, at the top, you'll see I always have our team motto. So I think that, the more that can be in the forefront of our minds, the better, so that we can hold each other accountable to that and ensure that we're living that on a daily basis. Next are just player notes. Of course, the reality of, how many athletes will we have at practice? How many girls are injured or maybe can only do non-contact, and same thing with what coaches and or training partners we will have at practice that day. Down at the bottom, you'll see that's where we lay out all of our teams ahead of time. So if we're playing 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, all the teams will be set up on the bottom. On the column on the left, of course, is the time on our watch, the clock that we want to be starting, but then also the amount of time that we want on the game clock to be able to run it down. LTAD, so really just I'm trying to split up all my all the drills and categorize them based on whether it's fundamental movement, fundamental technical, compete, recovery, mental, communication. So again, I'm doing that because as we move through our YTP, we'll be spending a different percentage of time on certain areas. And so it just allows me to organize it in that way. And then the column on the far right, POE, is points of emphasis. So you'll see I try where possible to not ever have more than 3. And that's where amongst our staff, so if I'm leading a drill, then amongst our staff, we will split up the points of emphasis so that we ensure that that the athletes are receiving not the same feedback from all of the different coaches, right? But that one coach is really focusing on giving feedback for us to force them to use a screen and contain the ball handler, right? And it's on like that so that we're all watching different things. As I spoke about the mental component, this is our question of the day. What are my strengths on the court? Personally, I find, especially with females, giving them an opportunity in a trusting and safe environment to build that confidence in saying what my strengths are is really important, and we need to continue to work on that. This is our linear and lateral work. As I said earlier, 5 minutes every practice. We are working, and what we work on changes block to block based on our YTP, so that we are, of course, progressing over the course of the season. Next, you'll notice, so this is a pre-competitive phase, right? It's our 5th practice of the year. High focus on us within the fundamental technical aspect of all of our drills. Really trying to build and work on our decision making, but really focusing a priority on the development over the course of this phase. Then towards the end of practice, we almost always have a shooting drill that tends to lead into our warm down. So we tend to use that last shooting drill as an opportunity for their heart rate to decrease. So it's usually a bigger group shooting drill. And then that leads us right into the warm down. All right, our next practice plan. First, I would just say at the top, so question here, so we've just played 3 exhibition games on the weekend, and now our question is, what's your biggest takeaway after 3 games? I think that it's important to me not only to involve the athletes, in the process of learning, as in specifically on the court, but it's also important to involve them in our growth and process as a team. So of course, at the beginning of the year, before playing games, we would have discussed our team goals, but now that we've had 3 games and we've had a bit of an opportunity for us to kind of test ourselves, it's important for me to then hear from the athletes. What are their takeaways from the weekend? What do they think that we did really well, and or what we need to improve on? And then how does that narrow our focus on our goals moving forward? The main area of this practice plan that I wanted to highlight is the section towards the bottom here. I've highlighted, we're building our aerobic capacity. So about a year ago, we really decided that we wanted to be a bit more purposeful in building our aerobic capacity while playing basketball. So without doing the typical, sprints, without doing a bunch of sets of lines, or even without doing as much training off the basketball court, that we really wanted to incorporate it within our practice plan. So you'll see we did a 3 minutes on to 1 minute work to rest ratio, and we would do 7 sets. And we actually incorporated this in our practices once a week in the off season, as well as all throughout our pre-competitive phase and the first half of our competitive phase. And I will say that by far, my team was in the best shape that they've been in ever. There were no limitations on playing time based on fitness. I also felt one of the side effects of this was really forcing the athletes and the coaches to coach and learn on the fly. For that 3 minutes that they're on, whichever drill we are in, there was no stopping of the play. All athletes are working at their highest level as hard as they can for those 3 minutes. And then we would take the 1 minute to rest, grab a drink, and move into the next drill. Our practice plan is always posted for all of our athletes, so everyone would know what was coming. And of course, we would typically be doing drills that we had already introduced ahead of time. It wasn't a new drill on these times, but I thought it really pushed a lot of people outside their comfort zone, but also led to a lot of gains, both with our aerobic capacity as well as our ability to make decisions under pressure. This next practice plan is from our competitive phase. So this is the day before a game, but you'll see it's actually early in our competitive phase. So this is likely the second week of our league games this past November. So first of all, on the left side, we have slightly decreased our volume from some 2-hour blocks that we probably used most of the pre-competitive phase, and we're now down only to 1 hour 50, but like I said, again, we're early. And then you'll also notice that there's a much bigger focus of compete drills, right? So especially the day before a game, you know, we're in practice 33 now. We've moved, especially to the day before a game. We're going compete, especially in the first half of practice, is a bit more breakdown and competes that will then build into what we're trying to work on once we get into the tactical and the compete. And then as we speak specifically with respect to our opponent that we would be facing the next day. This last practice plan is an example from our tapering phase. So for us, we tend to taper, it's a bit schedule dependent, but we tend to taper around end of January, leading into February, and then continuing that throughout the course of playoffs. For us, within the tapering phase, I would say 1.5 hours is the maximum length of any of our practices, and we likely range between the hour time slot to the 1.5 hour time slot. We were fortunate that heading into playoffs, we actually finished league competition on a Friday, so we were able to have a Saturday and a Sunday with a lot more recovery that then led to us being able to have 1.5 hour practice the day before. I would just say during the tapering phase, a lot of it is going to be based on feedback from the athletes with respect to their RPE, as well as just how they're physically feeling. Similar to the last example, right, and especially day before playoffs, we are getting in, getting shots up, competing, getting shots up, competing, you know, getting shots up, and then we're out. Right, so everything, there's not much for teaching that's happening. You know, we're reviewing at this point, and everyone's feeling really confident about our decisions within our offenses and our defenses, and then we're getting shots up so that we're feeling good and confident going into game day. The other thing that I just wanted to highlight here is my question of the day on this day. So this is my 4th year that we've made the playoffs at York. And I would definitely say the first year that we made playoffs, I likely thought that we shouldn't talk about how anyone was feeling because, of course, we were all nervous, etc. And that was likely not the right way to deal with it. And so on this day, we talked about, you know, what emotion are you feeling? And more importantly, how are you managing it? You know, and across the room, there are going to be athletes who are nervous and are anxious, you know, and want to be successful and feel that pressure. And there are other athletes who will say, you know, they feel confident and prepared. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, is that safe space that we can all feel differently and that we just need to acknowledge and accept how everybody feels. But I think as a coach, especially just understanding if your athletes are not prepared to manage this situation or they're not managing their emotions, to then identify that so that you can then help them through that. So after you've got your, you know, your plan, you've created your framework, you know, and the practice has happened. Now we need to be able to create opportunities and have a plan in place for how we're going to analyze and reflect, and then really make it better, right? We want to learn from what we've done. So I think first of all, for us, we do video all of our practices. We do it for 2 different reasons. I would say 1, we video so that we're able to give feedback live in practice, whether that's individually and or to different teams, so that we can point out things that that we've done well and or some specific teaching or learning points. And then of course, just video for staff and or athletes to be able to watch after the fact, so that you're able to reflect and really see, you know, if I thought that drill was focusing on transition, but then as it got going, it ended up maybe more just being focused on our transition defense, well, I think that that's an important thing for you to then recognize, because it's really not about what we teach, but about what we're truly emphasizing during those practices. Same thing for stats. You know, I think we're fortunate with a manager to be able to stat all of our practices. I likely think that in terms of analyzing and reflecting on a practice plan, for me, it's the number of shots that we're getting up that I really want to see in those stats. And if we're getting up enough shots, and then I think it's that tracking specifically. So for us, with tracking being that defensive minded team, you know, we want to be tracking defensive touches, steals, any kind of disruptions or shot clock violations, but we also really want to look at how many opportunities did we give our team to work on this and or to emphasize that, and based on the time of year, is that what we're looking for? And then lastly, load monitoring. Of course, this depends on the level of program that you have and the resources that you have available to you. You know, some of my work with Canada Basketball at times has definitely involved being with programs who all have heart rate monitors. And of course, that gives you some great direct feedback immediately. But there's most research would say that RPE is rather close in terms of the variability on the information you're able to receive from that, in comparison to what you get from heart rate monitors. So again, for programs that can't afford you know, those heart rate monitors, I highly encourage you to use that RPE, because it's not uncommon for, as a coach, you to think that the RPE, the practice plan, was only around a 5, and then potentially have athletes who, like a big group of your athletes, who rated it as an 8. And we really want to try to narrow that gap between what you thought it should be and what the athletes actually perceived it to be. That's all I have for right now, Dave. I'm hoping that there are some questions. I saw a few in the Q&A there.
Yeah, there definitely are some questions, so I'll get to them. Some are longer than others, but we'll throw them at you and try to get in as many as we can here. So first one is a shorter one. Is the question of the day asked and answered in big groups or small groups and partners? How do you do that?
Yeah, great question. We've done it in a few different ways, but a little bit the way that we design our warm-up is that I will put the question out to the whole team at the beginning of practice, and then they have an opportunity while they're doing some things within warm-up, getting their heart rate up, to be able to think about what their answer is. And then we do some of our stretching and activation in a circle, so that actually we share as an entire team, and that's players and staff.
Okay, in that theme with athlete feedback, do you ask athletes to rate RPE during practice or after practice?
Yeah, that's all done immediately after practice, and it's done individually. So the intent is that, as much as possible, you want each individual on your team to give their own rating without talking to their teammates and say, like, what are you putting down? I thought it was this. There is no right or wrong answer, and so we really just encourage them to be sure that they're saying exactly what it felt like for them, which is okay if it's different for their teammates.
Nice. What are some examples of how you drill decision-making under pressure?
So I think that, again, it's going to depend on what it is we're trying to work on. But I think that specifically, so let's say that we're trying to work on reading help side defense, right? So we've got, some really good slashers, and we've, at different times talked about, or we've looked at on film, their different reads. But at the end of the day, come game day, they've really struggled with being able to make that decision under pressure. We're trying to then make practice as comparable to a game, but the reality is that is rather challenging. So different things that we would do would be, we would decrease the amount of time they have to be able to do it, right? So let's say if they're attacking defense, once they get to 2, we're limiting them and saying that they need to make a decision within about a second, right? Because we're trying to pivot to be able to find. Another way would be that we're trying to then increase the pressure by increasing the actual physical pressure that they're feeling from the defense. So again, perhaps with time and space, we can make that decision. But when a more aggressive defender is stepping up on help, that's where the turnovers are coming from, or the inability to make a great decision. So now we're going to have that help defender, whether it's a guided defender or a live defender, we're going to have them be much more aggressive on the ball to really try to force that pressure. And then lastly for us would be increasing the number of defenders so that there's not always I think that sometimes, if you're doing it with an advantage situation, it should be easier. And so then now we're going to try to put you in that disadvantage situation so that it should be harder for you.
Okay. What would be an example of something you do with linear and lateral progressions?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the way that we split it up, and I would even say we're doing a lot of different things right now. But if I think just about laterally, our first progressions are going to be some like lateral bound and sticks, right? So it's almost like that skater hop you would think about, right? So I'm loading on one leg and I'm laterally bounding and then sticking my landing on balance in one direction. And so I'm doing that, back and forth as we're going left and right. And then we would also do like some shuffles to pause, right? So we're typically, we'd probably start with, going say from the baseline to the foul line. And so it becomes, a defensive shuffle. So we're going laterally to the free throw line extended. They've got to pause, and stop that momentum and then come back. And then we're just going to continue to progress that. We typically progress from 1 month to the next, which usually aligns with our blocks. Our linear progressions are all, of course, it's really based on, sprinting, but then being able to decelerate and change direction. So we'll start with sprints, potentially half kneeling, and build up to starting on your stomach. And then doing sprinting into back pedal, back into sprinting. Again, really just trying to build that foundation of their linear and lateral movements.
You talked about cooling down. What are some advice or ideas for doing that at the end of a practice?
Yeah. So for us, as I mentioned a bit, I almost always have it be some form of shooting drill. And when we make it a shooting drill, it's not a high intensity shooting drill, right? So it's not a, we're not going in terms of game speed. And so typically they're in bigger groups. So we'll do something, we have a drill called W shooting, where they're really just getting shots, kind of baseline, foul line extended top and through the other side. But they're in bigger groups. So if you have, say, 6 per group, their reps are not overly high, but then it's one group a bit versus the other. And then we're finishing with free throws. So everybody on their team, after they've finished the team shooting, has to make 2 free throws in a row. And so then again, and in combination with the team shooting and then leading into some form of free throw shooting, allows their heart rate to cool down before we get into static stretching.
Back to your mental component, do you find when you do your question of the day, you have the same players always responding? And if you do, how do you encourage responses from players equally?
Yeah, I used to have a big issue with that. And I think that probably having been the athlete that would always want to respond, I think it's super important. First of all, for us, everybody has to answer. So it's not it's not optional. It's not a let's just get one answer and then talk about that. We're really looking consistently to hear from every athlete and all of our coaching staff. So everybody gets an opportunity for that. I think that just a few suggestions with respect to, when you're posing questions to your athletes and you have, a few athletes who consistently answer. Something I've done is, I've tried to say, okay, whether it's over the course of a practice, you only have 3 tokens. And every time you answer a question, it's 1 token, right? And so now you really have to think a bit more about, how many have I used? And of course, early on, it's a bit more management by you as the coach in terms of tracking. But then I think it also allows you, to say, hey, Lindsay, you haven't used any of your tokens today. Would you like to take a shot at, answering this question? Or, thank you, Madison. I appreciate you volunteering, but you've already used all your tokens. Let's hear from somebody else.
A couple questions about your when you talked about your plan for your game weeks, and a couple questions about just the intensity in practice. So again, I think some of these coaches are coming from a high school's platform where maybe they play one game a week, but wondering about how would you build intensity to a game day, and then do you automatically lower it immediately after? And then before a game day, do you shorten your practice and just make the intensity higher, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, no, great question. And I do think that, again, it is a relative, even in terms of like number of practices that you're having, as well as relative to how many games. I think that the biggest thing for me is, first of all, let's just say on a typical in competition phase, if we've played games Friday and Saturday, and then we take Sunday off, when we come into practice on Monday, there's no way that physically our main minute getters, so let's just say our top 8 players, they are physically not ready or capable to go at a high intensity. That doesn't mean that what we do, we're not going hard. It just means, first of all, in our moderate practices, we do, I would say, next to zero full court. Right, so that Monday, that moderate practice, we are not going full court in anything that we do. And again, I'm not saying maybe that this one thing, but almost nothing on a moderate day are we doing full court. So the breakdowns and or the skill work that we do on that Monday is still going to be at a somewhat high intensity, but because of the amount of exertion required once you actually go up and down in full court, because we're taking that away, it is going to decrease the RPE for them. And then we're going to build that. So, then as we, let's say we build into a Tuesday practice, same thing here, we're still probably going to do predominantly half court type of drills, but we are likely going to add in at least one, if not two, so kind of a maximum of 20 minutes in a 2-hour potential block for full court work. And we would probably split it up so that we've increased it slightly, but it's not a huge jump, so we're not going too hard. And then assuming that we have a Wednesday and Thursday practice, same thing on the Wednesday. Wednesdays, we're definitely going to increase the amount that we're going full court. And we still got breakdown drills, but we are definitely doing more full court there, to the point that Thursdays, we're doing our most amount of up and down, but we're decreasing the overall volume of the practice. So whether that is in terms of time or in terms of, again, I'm going to say just amount of reps. We also on Thursdays tend to bring in training partners, which allow us to ramp up intensity but decrease volume because we get to add in more people to compete against.
To follow up on that, so your practices are heavy on compete and you want to have fun, you need a lot of energy in your practice. How do you deal when your team comes in with no energy and you're dealing with athletes where it's hard to get them up to the level they need to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is, I think everyone knows, it's easy when you walk into the gym and there's energy and everybody's talking and they're ready. I think that's where, your ability to read the room and recognize, for me personally, likely it's to recognize, what, we need to do a fun game like ultimate frisbee for warm up today, right? Because we need them, like, clearly the shift in their head hasn't happened from academic to basketball. So we need to really kind of help them with that. So we need to do something fun. I think at times also it's even just engaging with your leadership group and really trying to get a read or feel for the room. And it might partially be needing to even maybe modify your practice. But I really think that a lot of it is going to be set in that pre-practice meeting where you're having that conversation, but then leading into it, whatever the fun drill is that you already have done in the past and you know that they like it, and they get excited about it. To me, it's an immediate change on the practice plan if that's how they come into practice, and really just trying to make light of things a little bit or do things a little bit differently to try to pull the fun and the energy out of them so that then you can actually really dive into to your competes.
I'm going to ask you a question I know the answer to since I worked with you, but are you consistently on schedule with your practices? And do you find a phase of the year where maybe you don't get through everything in a practice?
So I like to stay on task for sure, because I think that there are times within a practice where if you just feel like you're continuing to kind of stay with it because they haven't gotten it yet, I don't believe that gives you the dividends that you're hoping for, because it almost it's like beating a dead horse. But I think that there are for sure times during the season, even like I said, in terms of if they're not having fun, where you've got to be able to adapt, and or even it might be maybe you were planning for it to be a moderate to high intensity practice. And as things get going, you can notice, especially that your veteran, players, that they're really sluggish a little bit, or they're really slow getting moving. And so you can tell that they actually probably need a bit more recovery than we've had. And so then trying to look to modify that practice plan. But yeah, I do like in general being a taskmaster and trying to stick to the plan.
I knew that answer. So I'm going to try to squeak in a couple more here. Do you change up who you would consider leaders from practice to practice? Do you change your voice by design, I guess is the question.
Yeah. So we definitely work a lot with our captains and to try to empower them. But we do different things to try to also give other players a voice and an opportunity to lead. And an example of that would be if we're in a shell defensive drill and we're going 4-on-4-on-4, instead of a coach being responsible for, let's just say, their communication, I would highlight and I would say, hey, Avery, you're in charge for holding your team accountable to communication, right? And especially for somebody who's maybe not typically a leader, but maybe that is also a strength of theirs. I think it really just gives an opportunity and helps kind of build that culture that they all do have a voice, and that it's not, not a matter of someone's voice is bigger than others, but that we really want to have contributions from everyone.
A quick one, during scrimmages in practice, do you mix up your teams or do you keep starters on the same team?
No, I mix them up. I feel like I mix them up back and forth. I do definitely practice with starters together at different times. I find personally, coaching women, that there can be a lot of interpretations or things being read into, how we're choosing teams. So we do try to split it up, a bit kind of month to month, that, these are teams for Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then of course, kind of as things maybe or roles start to slightly change or evolve over the course of that, the beginning of the competitive phase, then we'll look to make some adjustments. But I think that we're trying to find, who works well together and not necessarily pigeonholing and saying that, that it's only starters and only non-starters.
Nice. Well, we're going to wrap up there. Again, I really appreciate that session. Tons of really good stuff in there. I'm going to give you the final word, and then I'm going to close things up.
Well, thank you so much. First, I'll just put my contact info there. If anybody would like to reach out, I'm happy to share anything or have any other conversations about basketball. Dave, I can't thank you enough for being the one introducing me and kind of taking care of all the questions today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone stays healthy and safe during these challenging times.
I'll let you off the hook without answering your favorite assistant coach question too. So,
my answer is you. Hopefully, all my other assistants aren't listening.
Thanks again, Erin, for presenting at the Cross Canada Coaches Clinic, presented by Basketball Immersion and Golden Ticket. I would say to everybody, Make sure that you're following our social media. The replays will come up eventually. All the information will be on that. We are going to have another speaker up very shortly. So again, thanks to everybody, and thanks to Erin, and we'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Dave.